call on Mr. Binit Somaia, Director of CAPA South Asia, again to share an overview of the aviation and tourism relationship between India and New Zealand.
Thank you. Good to be back again. So, my presentation will have two key components. Firstly, to provide you with an overview of the overall outbound travel market from India, just to give some context for what is the potential for tourism to New Zealand. And then secondly, to consider what are the implications and the impacts of air connectivity on these tourism flows. So just starting off by quantifying the market. Now, in 2017, there were just under 18 million Indian resident departures. You may hear numbers of 22 million, 24 million. You should just be careful that the Indian government publishes tourism flows by nationality, not by country of residence. And for a country that has a very large diaspora of non-resident Indians who live overseas but have Indian passports, that does lead to a skewing of the data. But we've done the analysis on this and we've broken it down to figure out who are the actual residents, and it comes to about 17.7 million people. Now, a couple of striking features of the Indian outbound market relative to the global average. Firstly, the pure leisure component. So we're talking about people that are going primarily for the purpose of a holiday, is about 30% of the outbound total. That compares to 53% globally. Where the largest segment is from India is in VFR, that's visiting friends and relatives, as well as other aspects such as religious travel, education, but particularly labor travel, people going to work primarily in the Gulf, but also elsewhere. That's about 44%. So if we take that 17.7 million, and then we look at the leisure component, and that's what we're going to focus on just for now, that ends up with 5.3 million people that went overseas for a holiday. And given that some people travel more than once a year, you're looking at about 4.4 million unique travelers. To be honest, that's a pretty disappointing number. It's 0.3% of the Indian population. Now, even if we recognize that, let's say, 95% of the population of India does not have the means to be able to travel overseas, amongst the 50 million or so people that we estimate have what you could say middle class or higher Western level incomes, it's still only about 8%. So again, as we always keep saying, wherever there are these gaps, it represents an opportunity. So where are these people traveling? If we look at destinations by all purposes of travel, these are the top 10 destinations. Dubai is the largest. But then as you can see that some of those markets, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, these are primarily labor markets, people going to work. China is overwhelmingly a business market. New Zealand, for comparison, and I should note, for like reasons, I've put the 2016 numbers there because of the latest that we have for some of these markets. New Zealand was 52, but in the latest rolling 12 months data that was released recently, I believe New Zealand has gone up to 68,000, so strong growth being seen there. Now, if we look specifically at leisure, where are people going for holidays? Dubai remains the #1 market. But Thailand moves up. France actually climbs very strongly from 10th up to 3rd. And then we see a few new markets enter the top 10 once we take out the labor markets, such as Sri Lanka, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and Switzerland. And, okay, Switzerland is a lot closer to India than New Zealand is. But if we're looking at sort of the customer proposition, markets that offer scenic natural beauty and that is very attractive to a number of these market segments, we can see what could be possible in New Zealand. Again, that's a case of if you want that many visitors, whether it's a sustainable level, but that could be a potential benchmark that could be looked at. And there's encouraging reasons to think that that might be possible. Last year, Expedia, the online travel agency, engaged us to do some consumer and industry research across India on outbound travel trends, desires, aspirations, behavior. And we did some very extensive, apart from the travel industry and stakeholder surveys, we did some very extensive consumer surveys. And we asked the question, if time and money were no object, which would be your dream destination? And the question was asked unprompted. We didn't give a list of destinations to choose from. People had a free format response. And I think it's very encouraging. Renee should be happy that New Zealand ranked third in metro cities. That's the 6 largest cities and the 6 cities that account for the vast majority of outbound travel from India. I think that's an outstanding result for a country that is relatively small, very remote from India. The fact that it has that level of desire and interest is, I would say, from New Zealand's point of view, extremely encouraging. If we look at non-metros, generally, I don't want to generalize, but generally a less sophisticated traveller segment. They have less experience in going overseas. New Zealand drops a little bit. And then if we look at first-time travellers, it's further down still. But if you look at the metros, again, New Zealand 5 points above Switzerland, and Switzerland's getting almost 200,000 leisure visitors. So how do we unlock this potential? There's a few key areas. Firstly, I think Mr. Mittal referred to the fact that you need to segment your customers much more effectively. We, from our office in Delhi, we do a lot of tracking of the activities of different national tourist offices in India. And we quite dismayed that some of them tend to view India as a single market. It's not. It's multiple markets. The behavior and preferences of a traveler in Chennai is quite different from someone in Delhi, or between metros and non-metros, between the millennials and their parents. I mean, we see, for example, millennials are far more adventurous, far more comfortable moving into markets where, for example, vegetarian food may be less easily available, whereas those used to be considerations for their parents. And also, I think the younger generation, and it's not just an Indian phenomenon, but the younger generation is more inclined to consume than their parents. They're more influenced by social media, and they have more disposable income. As we were looking before, the sort of changing shape of the income pyramid to a diamond means that there are more people that have the ability to spend. Visa requirements. That can be a significant constraint. I think the positive news on that is that most countries are, because they recognize the potential of the Indian market, most countries are making it easier. The sort of requirements are becoming less onerous. Applications are being processed more quickly, but it is still an area where countries that make it easy can establish a competitive difference. Delivering value. India is regarded as a very price-sensitive market, and rightly so, it is. But I think we would argue that it is more a value-driven market. I think if you can deliver something overall that is seen as good value, people are willing to spend. There is that ability and propensity to spend. But from the research we've done, people would rather spend money at the destination than on the airfare. And so LCCs, long-haul LCCs in the case of New Zealand, have a role to play in stimulating the market. Non-stop connectivity, the theme of the day, but there is no question, and I'll look at an example later on, that non-stop connectivity has a significant stimulatory impact on traffic. And in those cases, historical traffic may not be a guide to what can be achieved in future with non-stop connectivity. And capacity. There is a problem in India that most of the eastbound markets from India are capacity constrained, and those are the markets that New Zealand relies upon to deliver traffic. So in terms of air connectivity, we've seen the market is now, last year was just over 250,000 passengers two-way. As it's doubled in the last 5 years. A strong spike in 2015 driven by the Cricket World Cup, but encouraging to see that growth has maintained afterwards as well. What's interesting is that despite the relative sizes of the populations, there's actually more New Zealanders that go to India than Indians that come to New Zealand. Longer term, that will change because the upside potential ex-India is obviously so much greater. But it is interesting that at the moment it's actually quite balanced. What are the markets? Delhi and Mumbai at the Indian end account for about 50% of traffic. At this side, Auckland is about 80%. And Delhi-Auckland, no surprise, is the largest single city pair. I won't go through the chart on the map on the left because Scott covered that this morning. That's how people are currently traveling between India and New Zealand. If we look at what are the potential new routes that could develop, well, now that Philippine Airlines operates to Auckland, and within the next 12 months we expect Philippine Airlines to start services to India. That's one new gateway that could open up. One-stop services, long-haul services, as much as we would like a service to start, long-haul services are challenging, they are risky, long, thin routes, and it's possible that supposing an Indian airline wanted to consider a service to New Zealand, they may actually consider a one-stop service to test the market. This is what we're seeing with Indigo, for example. They are going to start services to London Gatwick in the next few months, and that will be a one-stop service via Istanbul. That's due to aircraft range issues, but that may be a similar issue in the case of Auckland as well. Australia could emerge as an increasing gateway. Full disclosure, we're currently working for an Australian airport to develop a route development business case for a non-stop service between India and that city. And we are, as part of the analysis, looking at scheduling that service to enable connections through to Auckland. And of course, non-stop service being the holy grail. This is just an example of what a non-stop service can do. This is one of the most recent new routes that has been opened from India to what we would consider a leisure market. That's Delhi to Madrid. Air India started a non-stop service in December 2016, and after the first 12 months of operations, the total traffic on that route had increased by 46%. Now, if you get a low-cost carrier doing something similar, the stimulation factor could be even higher. And Air India wasn't even operating a daily service on this route. So again, the likelihood is that by putting in more capacity, they could stimulate further. And then just to sort of close up, this is the issue mentioned before, that the gateways in Southeast Asia that currently bring traffic to New Zealand, most of them have exhausted their entitlements to operate to India. Singapore and India may restart bilateral negotiations shortly, but as you can see, it is a challenge in the short term. And Air New Zealand, using Singapore Airlines as their partner, you can see there, Air New Zealand and Singapore Airlines started a partnership. It led to an immediate increase in the number of passengers that Air New Zealand was able to capture. They subsequently got regulatory approval for third-party codeshare by the Indian government. That allowed for further increase in traffic, but ultimately, since they're using Singapore Airlines metal, they are constrained by the same bilateral issues that Singapore Airlines is facing, and therefore it hasn't gone higher. And just to conclude, our modelling, as part of the study we did with Expedia, is that if we address some of these air connectivity issues, and if we invest in some more targeted marketing and product development, we see no reason why New Zealand couldn't achieve sustained 15% per annum growth in leisure travellers through to 2025, which would mean that by that date we'd have 100,000 annual leisure arrivals. This is excluding VFR and business and other traffic, which would obviously make the total number much higher. But that is the potential. There's a great opportunity. And if anybody is interested in our reports on inbound and outbound travel from India, you can request complimentary reports. Just go up to our website and we'll be pleased to send them to you. Thank you so much.